Hey friends, David Miller, multimedia artist in Los Angeles. Welcome to my home studio, Primordial Creative. This was a year that had a lot of music happenings. I did a lot of remixes of my favorite artists. I created my own AI singer and model. It all kind of came from the same spot. I was investigating what you could do with some of the newer technology, including Suno and voice AI, where you can break down songs into their multi-track levels. I did 9 Inch Nails, who already had a lot of multi-tracks out there. I did The Killers and Muse, who had some multi-tracks out there, and I did others with, the AI methods I mentioned. Phil Oakes and Lana Del Rey, which I did entirely using things like voice AI to break things down. And then I did U2.
In the wind, we hear their laughter. In the rain, we see their tears. Hear their heartbeat. We hear their hearts beat.
I just have so much to say about their official remixes versus, what I've done and how I feel about their most recent reissue, which I've dubbed How to Scrape the Bottom of the Barrel. I want to make a very special video about the official U2 remixes, what influence they've had on me, what I think are like the best of the best for people who are interested in that topic. And I could also do a similar one for 9 Inch Nails, except that's a different world because Trent Reznor not only is kind of masterminded with what's come out as a remix, but when he began releasing multi-tracks to the fans, that just became his whole universe. So maybe in the future I'll do a video of 9 Inch Nails and what are, in my opinion, the best of the fan mixes and the best of the official mixes. U2, the quality is all over the place, and there's so many of them. I'm not sure if there's other bands, maybe like Depeche Mode or something, but who've had that long a career and that many remixes across the decades. So let's begin in the 80s, and we're gonna skip Boy in October. Even though there was a later version of the song Tomorrow that Bono and Adam released on their own, we're gonna focus on things that they did sort of like solo, so not the versions of Stay or If You Wear That Velvet Dress that Bono did with other people. We're gonna talk about official remixes. When you get to War, you get the kind of remixes that they had of that era. These are the Kevorkian mixes from Francois Kevorkian. And similar to like what The Clash would release or Blondie, they're just extended versions of New Year's Day and Two Heart Speed is One. Nothing like super special. Similar things happened on the Unforgettable Fire with the Celtic dub version of Wire. I think those came out on the Unforgettable Fire reissue. The really good early remix I can name and point to is A Sort of Homecoming that Daniel Lanois did. And the album version of A Sort of Homecoming, it took me a long time to really understand that and warm up to it because it's so smeary and shoegazy and hazy. And I, at the time that I got into U2, I was like all about Mysterious Ways and things that were like kind of sharp and punchy. I really adore the original Sort of Homecoming now. The remix that Daniel Lanois made of A Sort of Homecoming is so in line with what he was doing with Peter Gabriel at the same era that you could almost pick up that Lanois remix and transfer it over to Peter Gabriel's So or anything else that has maybe like the Robbie Robertson stuff that Lanois also worked on. But things that have this sort of vaguely tribal chanting to it. Really love that mix and find it very bright and sparkling. It's very similar to how they played it live. When you get to the Joshua Tree, I'm not going to talk about the mixes that are like the Where the Streets of No Name single with the added edge backing vocal. But when they did a reissue of the Joshua Tree and added on these extra versions and mixes, some felt like they had brand new Bono vocals to them. Some of them felt like they're just sort of earlier demo versions. So let me get the demo one out of the way. That's the other version of Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For that has the acoustic guitar very prominent.
found what I'm looking for.
It's okay, doesn't catch my interest. I can see how there's a lot of elements of Still Haven't Found that didn't make it into the final mix. And if you ever watched that Making of Joshua Tree documentary, you get to see Lanois play with those sounds that you can tell the rest of U2 hadn't heard in decades. The really good stuff, though, is also from Lanois, of course. He did a version of Running to Stand Still, which instead of having its Velvet Underground roots, it has this soaring ambient guitar that Daniel Lanois has on all of his own releases. You know, probably a pedal steel.
Talk without speaking, scream without raising your voice.
It's so atmospheric and ambient. I'm in the camp that believes that U2's at their best being atmospheric and emotional and kind of leaning into those dreamier aspects rather than being like a rock band or a pop band. Lanois also did a With or Without You version, which I adore. It has a really neat rhythm to it. The only thing I could say, though, is that the original With or Without You is just crystalline perfection. So there's no improving on that. By setting it to this like distinct rhythm, it doesn't have that kind of like rise and crescendo the way the original version of With or Without You does. There is a Flood remix of Where the Streets Have No Name, which is very abstract. And initially I listened to that, I'm like, what is this thing? And I've really come to appreciate it as an art object. I think a lot of remixes, if I was a professional remixer and I was allowed to do what I was wanting to do with songs, I would really drive in making them more abstract and dreamy. That's kind of what I did with Phil Oakes. I had always thought about, like, what would a 60s singer like a Phil Oakes or the Monkees or John Denver do if they were treated by the Future Sound of London, Aphex Twin, something like that.
I wanna tear down the walls that hold me inside. I wanna take shelter from the poison rain, where the streets have no name.
So, big fan of that Flood remix. I listen to it a lot for art inspiration, to be honest. Speaking of art inspiration, Jacknife Lee does this very dark, industrial dub version of Bullet the Blue Sky. And I have to say, when I had a photo studio and I had all the lights off and it was filled with smoke and red light and it kind of felt like hell, that was the song that I had cranked up really loud generally. Just that dissonant electronic hum and the way that it samples Bono's voice. Like, I think it's a perfect melding of the original song and then taking it into the 21st century, especially since Bullet the Blue Sky has been reinterpreted every single tour. I remember when it came to Pop Mart, it was like about dissolving identity or something, because it was so far removed from the Central American CIA coup type themes of the 1980s. And when it came time for Elevation, maybe it was about guns. When it was Vertigo tour, it was something else, so on and so forth. The other remixes that I recall from the Joshua Tree reissue, Steve Lillywhite did a new version of Red Hill Mining Town, which really reintroduced the horns, and that's a lovely mix. Big fan of that.
The link is lost, the chain undone. We wait all day for night to come, and it comes like a hunted child.
Red Hill Mining Town, the original one, whether it had synthesizers like Brian Eno synths, there was something transcendent about that song, and it's missing from the Lillywhite version. But the Lily White version has this sort of like worn down feel to it. So, you know, you can never win on some of these. And then there's a couple versions of One Tree Hill, Brian Eno, and I think St. Francis Hotel, something like that is the other version, both of which are super lovely and atmospheric and melodic. A great fit if you make a Spotify playlist of all the dreamy, atmospheric, you know, U2 stuff like Miss Sarajevo and Stateless. We get to Rattle and Hum. This is like the end of the 80s. We finally get real dance mixes coming out in that era of Desire and God Part 2. And maybe one more. There might have been some, I know there were single versions of When Love Comes to Town and Angel of Harlem, but I'm not looking at a list in front of me. So if I forget something, sorry.
In Hollywood Tonight.
Voodoo Economics.
In Hollywood Tonight.
Rattle and Hum is like my particular low place for U2, just because I find it generally inauthentic and really a spot where the quality control is all over the place. You know, absolutely big fan of Angel of Harlem, Heartland, and All I Want Is You. But when it comes to most of the other tracks, especially the remixes of God Part 2 and Desire, you know, they're of their era. It isn't something I want to listen to for fun, to be honest. That brings us to the 90s.
Give me 2 more chances, you won't be denied.
The golden age of U2 remixes. So golden that they put together a fan collection, called it Melon, and had a big success with that. Now, the Achtung Baby era really begins with Night and Day.
Won't be through till you spend my life making love to you.
The Frank Sinatra cover song they did, contributing to Red Hot and Blue or Red Hot and Dance, one or the other. And there were remixes of Night and Day, which are pretty cool, that have that early 90s breakbeat, shuffle, baggy kind of vibe. When they bring in Paul Oakenfold, famous for working with the Happy Mondays, I think the man is magic. And of the remixes he did for Achtung Baby, if we're comparing the Mysterious Ways one with that flute melody in the beginning and a really bouncy sheen, and it has like this beautiful extended guitar solo that they used live a lot, and his Even Better Than the Real Thing mixes, which are, you know, a little more house club oriented, I'm always going to go for that Mysterious Ways remix. Mysterious Ways, the other versions of that, compared to the Perfecto mix, the ones that are the Tabla Motown, I think is the name, they're okay. They're slowed down. They have that annoying effect to me, kind of like Strawberry Fields Forever, where, you know, in the course of making this, they've taken the vocal and slowed it down, and it's, whereas John Lennon might sound unearthly, but we also have versions of Strawberry Fields Forever where his voice is normal. I'll always go for the ones where the voice sounds normal. And the other remixes from that album, let's see, we've got the Who's Gonna Ride Your Wild Horses remixes, which were the single ones. I'm always going to default to the version on Baby. I think that unreleased demo version of Who's Gonna Ride Your Wild Horses has all the power that the album version doesn't have.
Who's gonna ride your wild horses?
The single version, once again, the drums are mixed really low, but instead of any sort of sonic blast, it's just replaced with acoustic guitars. You know, that is a lovely song. It's a beautiful song. There's so many great live versions of it. And like I said, the version on the Achtung Baby re-release decades later, that they call the Baby version, that's still my favorite. The Loungefly mix of The Fly, which I believe comes from Daniel Lanois, it's It's missing a lot of the power of the actual song, The Fly. So I think it's kind of like an interesting deconstruction, but not something I actively seek out to listen to on a regular basis. Even better than The Real Thing, Apollo 440 did them, and they also did some versions of One. I highly rate those remixes. I think Apollo 440 is a class act. The all-time greatest mix from Achtung Baby, in my opinion, is the one that came out decades later and that they performed on the 360 tour, which is the Fish Out of Water, Even Better Than The Real Thing.
Even better than the real thing.
There's something in me that really approves of remixes that take the original and just make some tweaks and maybe some modern enhancements, but doesn't lose any of the power. It just enhances everything that's already there. I think that's what, a great mixer and sound engineer does anyway, and highly appreciate that's how they came at Even Better Than The Real Thing when it came time to put out, a new reissue. They got a great remixer, Fish Out of Water, who also did some really good mixes from that No Line on the Horizon era. From Achtung Baby, we transitioned to Zooropa. Zooropa has a bunch of unreleased mixes, has ones that came out on the Melon. I can't really speak to the unreleased mixes. I did, give them a listen at the time. There was Daddy's Gonna Pay for Your Crash Car and Zooropa. Neither of which made an impression on me, to be honest. And the ones I highly rate are the Underdog Stay version, which is such a native tongues style hip-hop remix, great bounce. The king of all U2 remixes, best of them all, is the Lemon Perfecto mix. Once again by Paul Oakenfold. And it has gospel singer in there, and it has more powerful Bono vocals. It has an incredible melody to it that I'm not like a musician that can do comparative melodic structures, so I can't really tell if that gated synth sound is something that is adapted from the original Lemon, or if it's, something entirely new that Oakenfold contributed. But even though that song is like 8 minutes long, I could listen to it any time of the day, over and over and over, and really get a lot out of it. The other Lemon mixes, the Jeep mix and whatever else is out there, I despise them all. But I think they're by David Morales, and I'm trying to think of who else, can't remember off the top of my head. Not a fan of any of the other Lemon mixes except for the Perfecto mix from Paul Oakenfold. The Numb remixes, there's a Soul Assassins one, and then Rollo's Dignity one. Numb is a tough song to really do because of its unique, monotonous delivery. I appreciate that the Rollo mix pulled out more of Bono's vocal and tried to make it interesting, but Numb is a weird song. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. It's very conceptual, and in that sense it's perfect. Is Numb fun to listen to? I think they put a lot of sounds in the original version of Numb that make it fun. I don't think that translates to any of the other mixes. And we're gonna pass by the other versions of Stay and The Wanderer that appeared on the Menders soundtracks. And then kind of wrapping up the Achtung Baby Zooropa era, you have the work they did with Brian Eno and Passengers. None of that was directly a remix, but on the Miss Sarajevo single, you have this very oddball instrumental version of Zoo Station called Bottoms, and it sounds like the kind of thing that Brian Eno's assistant just kind of threw together while he was making tea or something. Nothing really to scream about with Bottoms. Pop era. This is where things get pretty wild. I cannot condense down all the mixes of pop songs. I'm just gonna go through the track list best I can remember. Discothèque. There's some weird versions of Discothèque that I'm a fan of. I think Flood did one and Howie B did one, the Howie B, Harry B mix.
You can reach, but you can't grab.
And then on the single, there's two versions of a song, Holy Joe, one of which is more sampled breakbeaty and the other which is called the Garage Mix, and it's just like pure garage YouTube. I think that should have been on the album, to be honest. If they were going to make an album that was like partially dance and partially rock and partially atmospheric stuff, like If You Wear That Velvet Dress, like throw off Last Night on Earth and put on Holy Joe. It's more fun. It accomplishes the same goal, and it would have brought like a little bit more of a spark to that album, I think. Or throw off Do You Feel Loved? Those Discothèque mixes I mentioned were on the CD single. That was great. Later on, I got the vinyl 3-pack of Discothèque, and I adored the Dave Holmes mix. It's very minimalist.
You know you chewing bubblegum. You know what that is, but you still want some. 'Cause you just can't get enough of that loving, stuff.
That only recently came out on Spotify. I don't think it was available on any CD single, but Dave Holmes, another class act remixer, did the soundtracks for the Ocean's films with Steven Soderbergh, and he did a Beautiful Day version with this like no vocal but super garagey approach. I actually kind of looked to Dave Holmes along with like James Lavelle from Uncle and other people who are producers, not so much about the songs they make, but by their aesthetic. I kind of borrow a lot of that for what I do with my own personal music. Things that are electronic and incorporate sampling and modern production techniques, but also really bring in a lot of like the rawness of the 60s garage and the 70s punk scenes. Mofo. That's the only one I really could get into. The others just like go, too housey, and they lose the power of the original song, or the drum and bass mixes. They just, there's a kind of remixing aesthetic that veers so far away from the original song, and a lot of times I think, they probably just had some stuff sitting around in the studio and they got hired to do a remix and they just, gave them the thing that they had sitting around the studio. I feel that way about, I think it was Lion Rock who remixed Last Night on Earth. It's called the First Night in Hell mix. And what does that have to do with the original song? I don't know. Now, released on the Mofo singles, but not Mofo, was a remix of If God Will Send His Angels, and this is the pop track that I probably like the least out of everything. I'll throw Last Night on Earth and Do You Feel Loved under the bus all day long, but If God Will Send His Angels sounds like a U2 cover band of a U2 cover band of a U2 cover band of a U2 cover band. This remix, which goes by both the Grand Jury mix and Big Yam mix, is one that I think U2 likes a lot too, because it keeps showing up on their compilations. It really is unique and interesting. It's funky, it's repetitive, but it seems to have a lot more spark and life than the actual official U2 track of If God Will Send His Angels. The single mix of If God Will Send His Angels is a little bit better, but really it's this oddball trip hop with the quirky, glitchy sound that is the one that I'm going to listen to when I choose to listen to this song. Staring at the Sun, a little bit different. That had the Monster Truck remix, and it had the Sad Bastards mix, and at least those were interesting takes. There was this oddball mix of Staring at the Sun called the Brothers in Rhythm mix, I believe, and it takes the acoustic live pop mart version of Staring at the Sun and adds in technological aspects. So I'm not opposed to people just taking an entire track and, you know, hijacking it in a way and adding on their DJ effects. I mean, there's other U2 songs like New Year's Day and With or Without You that have been released in a similar fashion. But in the case of this beautiful acoustic rendition of Staring at the Sun, I'm not saying it's sacrilege to mess with that, but the rhythm of it is so off. It just doesn't suit going straight techno with the way the Edge drums the acoustic guitar. So I'm not really a fan of it. So definitely not a fan of that mix either. I'm also remembering, going back to Zooropa, that Dirty Day had some remixes by Butch Vig, and I think another member of Garbage, that were very dissonant and in a sense very disappointing to me, because they took the structure of Dirty Day and made it more of a rock anthem song, which I'm, you know, an actual advocate for. Same with Hawk Moon, which I dissed in the previous U2 focused video, but they did it with kind of like a weak drum machine beat. And Larry Mullen Jr. being such a great drummer, I think you could just crank up his drums or put like some distortion on it if you want to make it a little more industrial, if you want to make a bigger noise. And in general, you know, the Dirty Day remixes, going back to Zooropa, kind of fall in the same camp with the Jimmy Cauty mixes of New York going forward to All That You Can't Leave Behind. They just are like a little too mechanized and missing enough of U2, even though they're attempting to be like straighter rock versions of those songs. Back to pop. We're gonna focus on pop. So we get to Staring at the Sun mixes, fairly decent. Really don't have a problem with the Staring at the Sun remixes, to be honest. You get to Please, which is totally reconstructed for the single. It was just, you know, obvious by the time they were touring Pop Mart that the songs have kind of like evolved and would sound a lot much better if they had more time in the studio, if they didn't have to like cut it and start promoting it and start touring it right away. The Please single mix is phenomenal. It's glorious, and it's got to be one of the best U2 singles, period. Finest moments, one of their finest music videos for sure. I'm going to do a future video about the art of U2, and it's going to talk about music videos and the album artwork and everything that Anton Corbijn has contributed to them, as well as other artists. That pretty much wraps up pop. I did check out recently a exclusive remix of Wake Up Dead Man that James Lavelle Uncle did. Nothing special. One of the problems with a lot of like trip hop and hip hop artists is they set up a beat, they set up a groove, and they let it run the whole song. There's not really like a good dynamic change to it. I like the music on its own, and I like it for, you know, the acts that do it well, being, you know, Portishead and DJ Crush and anything that Prince Paul ever produced, the Handsome Boy Modeling School, Dan the Automator stuff. But when I listen to U2, I'm kind of looking for something different than that. We're gonna skip The Sweetest Thing, new version, obviously superior to the B-side, not much to say about that. And the All That You Can't Leave Behind era, this is the start of, I think the remixes of the 1990s were specifically geared towards the club crowd and expanding U2's fan base into the rave culture, club culture, hip hop and techno that's happening at the time. I think when it got to the 2000s, it began as, you know, we're still selling CDs, but because of what Napster did and all of their kind of file sharing, it really just murdered the singles market and import market, and remixes as a whole just super declined. But we have some high points in the 2000s, starting with Beautiful Day.
See the tuna fleets clearing the sea out. See the bedwind fires at night. See the oil fields at first light. It's a beautiful day.
good remix, in my opinion, is the Quincy and Sonas version. They also did versions of Elevation, and I'm spacing if they did any other remixes, but there's something about them. They just like take the original, pull it apart, keep almost everything that's magic about it, and then just like enhance it as a club anthem. And I feel like there's a lot of people that hate that Quincy and Sonas version of Beautiful Day. I saw it like ranked poorly on a Reddit list, but to my mind, it's something that's very listenable, and I enjoy it a lot. Stuck in a Moment, that only has the acoustic version. Elevation, tons of remixes of Elevation out there. Chris Vrenna, popular of Nine Inch Nails and other projects. He did the version that was released as a single on Tomb Raider. Like aspects of that mix, but there's a version I like better that has all the same loud, noisy aspects, but has like a more of a bounce to it, and that's the Bifco mix. Course, the legendary Influx mix, which is what they came out to on the Elevation tour. That's its own category again. I guess kind of like the Lemon Perfecto mix and the Mysterious Ways Perfecto mix, where it's like, it's not like the original, but it is, and it just sort of takes it in this mystical other direction. I think Elevation, on the whole, as far as songs that have a lot of good mixes, you could find a lot of good ones there. They all kind of make the original sound really weak, to be perfectly honest. And all I gotta say about the one that they released as a single is that I appreciate that the guitars are cranked really high, but the beat is just like stiff. Go for the Bifco mix, check it out. It's got a nice bounce to it, and it's like a perfect mix of hip hop and rock, which is what I think they were aiming for with Elevation in the first place. Walk On. So this didn't get any single mixes except for the one that the Radiohead producer did. Anyways, that one is very similar to how they played it at the 9/11 tribute, but it's missing some of the extra guitars, and it just, on the whole, I think it's got good elements with the Hallelujahs at the end, which is how they played it live, but it definitely lacks the more robust sound of the album version. The remixes of Walk On that came out with the All That You Can't Leave Behind reissue are awful. They're so bad. They're like, you can tell why this stuff has been sitting on a shelf. Much like the tracks that I don't like off of the How to Reassemble an Atomic Bomb. There's a reason why this stuff was never ever released. Same goes for this Picante mix of When I Look at the World. It's just kind of strange and weak. New York mixes are by Jimmy Cauty. I already mentioned them. It's unfortunate because Jimmy Cauty from KLF, Justified Agents of Moo, actually one of my biggest inspirations in art, in music, in life. Just, the mixes never connected with me. How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb. Kind of interesting set of remixes here, and maybe like the most consistently good across all of their albums. You've got a bunch of Vertigos. You're introduced to a guy named Redanka, and Redanka turns in some really good versions of Miracle Drug, Vertigo, All Because of You. They all feel consistent with each other. And I think he did a version of I'll Go Crazy If I Don't Get Crazy Tonight as well. The highlight is whatever Jacknife Lee did. If he did a remix of Fast Cars, if he did remixes of Vertigo, they are like minimalist but powerful. I'm really, really into what Jacknife Lee is about, and I think at some point soon I'm gonna have to go look up a bunch of interviews with him and see what his production aesthetic is, because he's good at what he does. He did great stuff with REM and many other bands, and he was in a great band called Compulsion in the 90s that opened for Populate itself. Original of the Species has an acoustic version and a single version, both of which I rate higher than the album version.
The end is not as fun as the start. Please stay a child somewhere in your heart. I'll give you everything you want, except the thing that you want.
City of Blinding Lights. I know that Paul Epworth, most famously known as a producer of Florence and the Machine. As far as I know, that's what he's most famous for.
I'm getting ready to leave the ground.
He has some really good versions of that, as well as Hot Chip. They both kind of keep the melodies of City of Blinding Lights. Nobody did a good, like, rock remix of that song, which I think would be fun to hear. Stuff that's really stripped down and almost more garagey in the case of like the Holy Joe or the Dave Holmes Beautiful Day versions. And then I know there's a new version of One Step Closer that came out with the How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb reissue. I haven't heard it and I can't find it, so kind of curious as to what that's all about. But, you know, what did I say? Miracle Drug, Vertigo, All Because of You, City of Blinding Lights. We have alternate versions of Yahweh, which I rate higher than the album version, and demo version of Sometimes You Can't Make It on Your Own, which is missing a lot of the dynamic power of the finalized album version, which makes sense because it's a demo version. Moving on to the No Line on the Horizon era, very strange things are starting to happen. We have the first single, which I think a lot of people would rate as one of U2's worst singles, Get On Your Boots. That has a remix by Justice, which is fine.
Sexy boots, get on your boots, yeah.
I definitely like that Justice remix better than the album version, to be honest. Get On Your Boots is so weird. It's like they wanted to mix The Fly, Vertigo, and Elevation, but you know, crank the guitars way down and then having too many moving parts to it. It just doesn't gel as a track. It sounds like it came straight out of GarageBand, and not in a good way. I'll Go Crazy If I Don't Go Crazy Tonight has the club mix that they play live instead of the album version. There is a version of I'll Go Crazy that I can't remember exactly what it is, and I'd have to go back and it's been a while. So I'm gonna put it on the screen, and I think it has like this really creative melodic counterpoint. Snow Patrol did a remix of Unknown Caller, which in my mind, Unknown Caller, it's kind of like a forgotten U2 track, but it has that kind of shamanic power that something like Bad or All I Want Is You or Where the Streets of No Name have. So Snow Patrol is not the act that would bring that out in a remix. And I've only listened to that one a few times, to be honest, probably being quite unfair to it. No Line on the Horizon has an alternate version, and it is awesome. And it's just like straight ahead, full band together. I quite like the album version, to be honest. It's like very unique in U2's canon. Kind of goes back to the sort of Homecoming, Unforgettable Fire era, but it's like kick-ass instead of sort of soft and ethereal. That said, that No Line on the Horizon alternate version, high ranks. It's up there on the list. Magnificent, some great remixes. I think Redanka did some. Fred Falk does really great club version, which almost like completely adheres to the original version. For my money, the best remix of Magnificent was one that I don't think has ever been officially released by U2 at all, and that is the Rack mix. version was done by an artist who felt like he was going to make U2 sound more like U2 in their remix than the actual song did. And to that end, he used Melodyne and restructured the melody of the song. I think it's phenomenal. It absolutely is very catchy and poppy and makes you feel real good inside. I have no idea why some things never get released by U2 on their official stuff. You know, there's versions of Breathe for Nelson Mandela's birthday, which is acoustic and incredible. There's versions like this magnificent mix that never see the light of day. People like Redanka and Kilohertz create really good mixes of things like Miracle Drug and Original of the Species coming off of How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb, and either don't see the light of day for 20 years or don't see the light of day at all. And it's just very unfortunate that we end up getting things like the Crookers remix of Get On Your Boots as a extra bonus track, something that's unlistenable to begin with, really not appealing to U2 fans that I can think of. We are entering the new era of U2, the current era, which I think starts with Songs of Innocence. Maybe it starts with the Spider-Man stuff, to be honest, where they sort of shifted their focus towards being more of a kind of like stage spectacle. You could say this goes back to Zoo TV or before that, but I honestly think doing a Broadway play musical with Spider-Man changed the way that they approach their craft. You know, set lists became a lot more rigid when it came time to do the subsequent tours. There's not a lot of remixes that I can point to from this modern era because, you know, remix culture has changed significantly. It's very much this EDM stuff that isn't even meant to be appealing as unique songs. When it came time for Songs of Innocence, I'm thinking about what was out there, alternate takes of like The Troubles and Sleep Like a Baby. I think there's an ambient version of Miracle of Joey Ramone, which hasn't come out. And of course we have many acoustic piano versions of the songs in there. Nothing to note from Songs of Innocence, as is probably appropriate for that particular album. Songs of Experience, the club mixes come back in a big way. You're the Best Thing About Me. They're doing Get Out of Your Own Way. They're doing Summer of Love. They're doing Love is Bigger Than Anything in Its Way. And if you go on Spotify, you find, in the case of Summer of Love and Love is Bigger Than Anything in Its Way, you're finding tons of remixes, almost none of which are of note. The two things that really sparkle from that album, and I wish that they would turn to this man to produce their next thing, is when Beck, you know, well-known artist Beck Hansen, redid Love is Bigger Than Anything in Its Way and Lights of Home. They're so transcendent and unique, and I think they're glorious. Other thing that came out shortly after that album, which I find quite enjoyable, to be honest, is a set of remixes they created for when they toured India for the first time. And this has some very unique versions of, I think, Pride in the Name of Love, Love is Bigger Than Anything in Its Way, You're the Best Thing About Me, and I'm Spacing the Fourth. It's a pretty good EP, and it is available on Spotify. And if they've got to make remixes, show me what it's like from an alternate universe, you know? The club ones, I mean, I always wonder if there's people out there who say their favorite song in the entire world is just like this purely EDM club song. I know everybody has different music tastes, but when you think about your favorite song of all time, Is it something that has like a really monotonous beat and like a long intro and a long outro that are meant to fade in with other tracks and is geared towards like these very commercial, ultra commercial, we should say, avenues? I don't know. You know, I think something that means something to you personally, and maybe you fell in love under the strobe lights of a club to one of these songs. Now I'm looking back and thinking about what did I miss. I obviously didn't talk about Songs of Surrender. That can be its own thing. I do really like the ambient Where the Streets Have No Name version, and off the top of my head, the other ones that I listen to kind of like repetitively, I think there's good takes on The Fly, and that's the ones that really leap to mind. Where the Streets Have No Name and The Fly. And I know I missed some of the singles. Electrical Storm, great William Orbit version. William Orbit, another one of my production heroes, top class with everything William Orbit does. I can't ever complain about William Orbit. Forgot who did the remix of Window in the Skies. It might have been Jacknife Lee, but it's like a really techie one. I'm not even sure if that ever came out or it's just one of the things that floated around in the ether. But that one's pretty cool to listen to, even though it's got a lot of sharp sounds, piercing sounds. And for U2 fans, who knows if that's going to be a thing they're really into. You got the versions on the Best of 2000 that went back and rejiggered things for the songs Discothèque, Numb, Gone, and Staring at the Sun. Those are all fine. The Gone version on that 2000 Best of, absolute masterpiece. Although I think the version on Pop is an absolute masterpiece. One of my top U2 songs for sure. And clearly the best song on Pop and should have been a single. Lady with the Spinning Head, Salome. A few other B-sides ended up having remixes and alternate versions that definitely are, you know, worth your time, but because they are B-sides and not album tracks. Multiple versions, I think, of Hands Across America and The Ground Beneath Her Feet as well. The really cool one out of all that batch is Lady with the Spinning Head, the extended dance mix. It's like 6.5 minutes long and it's epic. And, you know, if you're a U2 fan, you're probably aware that that song was fractured off into The Fly and Ultraviolet. In its own right, it's a totally complete song, and that 12-inch mix is glorious. There you have it, my run through the U2 remixes as a long video. Wanted to do a deep dive, and I apologize if somebody out there is like, you skipped this one, it's unreleased, it's beautiful. You know, I was a U2 singles collector for a long period of time, up through the Vertigo era, and I still treasure those. I think they're in the attic in my old home in Arizona. My son kind of dives into my CD singles, and as you have seen through my cutaways in this video, I got a lot of the vinyls still lurking around. There's times when I like to look at my favorite bands like the Beatles, Nine Inch Nails, U2, Pop itself, and because I'm so familiar with the albums, I'll just do like entirely acoustic or entirely remix deep dives because I want to approach it from a different angle and I want to think about them a little bit differently, you know? I'm curious in the modern era how much influence the band even has on the singles and the remixes that are made, because if you look at like the Songs of Experience alternate versions that are out there, except for the Beck mixes and the Lights of Home one that I skipped that was the St. Peter's mix, it sounds like Radiohead's Burn the Witch, probably deliberately, but I don't know if they have any interest in it. I did read an article on U2 songs where one of the remixers talked about Bono calling and like contributing extra vocals and things like that, but you know, just the quality is all over the place these days. I don't think it's going to change. You know, I think as bands get older, they're outsourcing a lot of that kind of decision making, and they're thinking, you know, in the streaming age that you just have to have thousands of tracks because having thousands of alternate versions means more streams, quantity over quality, it seems. And that is a shame because I highly disagree with that on any level. At some point, you know, it just dilutes your brand. And a band like U2, who can't afford to pay for remixes, could just as easily take that money and put it towards more artsy stuff. You know, remixers they've never worked with, like Jack Dangers from Maybe Manifesto. His work is incredible, and he's been doing it for 30 years, longer than that. Get somebody, Trent Reznor did a remix of Vertigo, and it really didn't stand out, but, you know, get Trent to do more. I don't know. Keep bringing in people that have clearly demonstrated their ability to turn in quality work, like Redanka, like Oakenfold, like Daniel Lanois. Have an entire remix album all by Daniel Lanois. That would be glorious. Check out my own remix project of U2. Link is in the bio. Talk to you next time.